Okay, well, we're about 1 minute in, so to respect everyone's time, let's go ahead and get started. So, again, for folks just joining, my name is Nick Ray, and I lead the market development team here at RunSafe Security. And we've got a couple of esteemed panelists with us today that we're really excited about having for this particular webinar, John Stewart and Michael Grace. And before we jump in, I'm just going to walk through some logistics real quick and kind of set the tone for how this is going to unfold for all of you. This is meant to be really just sort of a lighthearted, open fireside chat type of format here. In the last couple of months, it's been kind of a crazy ride for, well, all of us on planet Earth. And we thought it might be fun to bring together some friends and colleagues and collaborators to just riff a bit on kind of the happenings of IT security, specifically in the perimeter. And so one of the things that we're going to do is just kind of go through 5 or 6 general themes, topics, questions on this particular overall theme, and get some insights from what we like to call our security heavyweights, some folks that have been around the block a time or two. And so feel free to chime in with questions in the chat, and we'll address those as we go along. Doug Britton is on as well. He is our CTO here at RunSafe. He's actually going to be kind of a semi-silent observer watching the Q&A, and we'll pepper those in where appropriate to keep the dialogue flowing. But at the end, we'll also carve out some time to get through any Q&A that we might not have gotten into during the actual presentation. So with that, welcome everybody. Let's jump in. Let's see if I can figure out how to advance slides here. So just real briefly, this is not going to be the theme of this discussion, but wanted to just do a quick intro to RunSafe Security if you haven't heard about who we are. Our mission is ultimately about disrupting hackers and immunizing software and protecting them from cyber attacks. So obviously we live in the cybersecurity space and live, eat, and breathe it, like probably many of you do on the call. And we're kind of all reacting to this sort of new reality. And given that we're a couple of months in, we've got a little bit of road behind us. And there's probably some insights that we're all drawing, and again, wanted to bring some industry folks together that have been around the block and have some experience to kind of hash through some of those and have an open dialogue discussion, and hopefully all walk away with some unique insights and takeaways. So with that, again, I'm the leader of our market development team. Kind of security has been a red thread through most of my career, although most of it's spent in mobile prior to this at Samsung and T-Mobile. Michael Grace will introduce in a second. We were in the trenches for many years together at Samsung. But John Stewart, welcome. He is one of our technical advisory board members and is the owner and founder of Talons Ventures, which seeks to make a meaningful impact in the community, the cybersecurity community, for both startups and large companies alike, and is leveraging his 30 years of experience to do all sorts of really good things in the space around governance, angel investing, board membership, and all that fun stuff. And over his career, held a number of senior roles, and we're excited to have him as part of our family, but most recently was the Chief Cyber and Trust Officer at Cisco. So welcome, John. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Nick.
And with John as our second guest of honor, Michael Grace, who leads the Samsung mobile Knox security team. Again, he and I spent a whole mess of time together working in the enterprise space for Samsung, and immense amount of respect for you, Michael. You've worked on security architecture projects across a number of different Samsung enterprise products like Knox or Samsung Pay, Samsung Pass, as well as bringing in an immense amount of experience in other areas, working with Google, other OEMs, regulated industries, and holds a PhD from North Carolina State University. So welcome, Michael. Good to have you here as well.
Thanks.
All right. So as I kind of talked about, we've had this explosion. Of course, the remote workers themselves have not exploded, thank goodness, but they have moved into a different area, right? All the folks that were in the four walls of the good old corporation are have dramatically shifted to a different area, remote work, and that has dramatically shifted the attack surface. And so we're going to unpack that and kind of talk about, well, how do you respond, or how have people responded, and get some insights there. So with that, the first thing I want to do is pose this question, and this is a guideline, right? So we'll keep this open and flowing, but for folks that don't see, or maybe just on audio, the many manufacturers, software publishers, others in the industry, all industries, perhaps got flat-footed in this sudden transition to work from home, the new ubiquitous three-letter acronym that we see everywhere. So what are some of those major security implications that we're seeing there? So John, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Nick. And first and foremost, I hope everybody on the call, both yourselves and your family and everybody else, are safe, and continue to be so, considering we're dealing with something which certainly in the last couple of generations we've not seen before. So it's partly the backdrop to the answer to what I would say the initial response to this question is, first is, how do you keep your employees engaged and safe, and communicate with them, all of which has to be done in a virtual environment, which, by the way, even in 2020, there are many businesses that have never tried to be a virtual environment. It hasn't been part of the culture to have work from home. It hasn't been something where remote access was natural. So in some cases, the major security implication is just purely enabling it to begin with, where you can do remote dialing. You can actually take care and move data, to and from your home, to and from application suites that are allowing you to use mobile devices, because you never did it before. I actually had to smile in sampling a series of customers of mine in which there were all sorts of scenarios in which they'd never had people, their executive team never did work from home, now all doing work from home. So the major security implications start off with connectivity. How do you effectively enable the new community of people? Scale, which, by the way, has created other security implications. I'll give you an example in a minute. And then continuity, because you're now dealing with a very different way of operating. And then last but not least, congratulations, welcome to the hacker world. They've noticed we're all working from home, and so another major security implication is they're targeting your houses. And don't underestimate that final one. I mentioned something unusual. Well, part of the security implication that's happened in many corporations, and my prior company at Cisco is one of them, was you suddenly had 75,000 people connecting over VPN connectivity globally as full-time employees. What used to be a don't split tunnel at all world, backhaul everything, get the security suite at the corporation front end, go to the internet, had to, wasn't a suggestion, had to split tunnel, because the total traffic topology of yanking everything back of that many people just made it impossible to in fact do business. So now you've got these remote sites, everyone's home, doing dynamic split tunneling on all the endpoints, and in some cases the extended LANs. Major security implication, because all that security suite that typically is being routed through is gone. And now you're doing direct connect to the internet in many cases, with the devices and the people communicating onto the services and suites that they need. Add in, final point, and then I'll cede the microphone. The security implication, I think, that is the not so well spoken about one, but yet has to be remembered, is there's a whole series of things being done right now in rapid fire just to operate. Undocumented, done as fast as possible, have to be retooled, re-engineered. And so there's latent security implications of all of these things that we don't even precisely know what they are. And because the massive change of IT infrastructure that had to happen to keep companies going globally, all sorts of companies of all kinds of types, made all the normal rules of doing change control break. You double the number of VPN concentrators, you upgrade your entire bandwidth service, you put wireless in everyone's homes, they're all buying printers, they're all buying new remote monitors. All of these things are happening in mass. And yet there wasn't really a playbook by which you could do it normally. And so we're going to have a latent set of security implications, which is the unknown things that have happened that have been reconfigured. that, by the way, not unsurprisingly, the hackers are going to keep an eye on for us.
Great insight. And yeah, the split tunneling issue, right? That makes a lot of sense and opens up an entire attack vector, right? Because we all know we like to multitask. And great examples too across just, I think, desktop type of use cases or general IT home use cases. And Michael, maybe you can weigh in on some of the mobile implications around this shift and what you're seeing from where you sit.
Yeah, so I think John really hit the nail on the head with continuity as being a big thing that a lot of people are trying to maintain right now. And that's having all kinds of ripple effects throughout industry, right? Because we're finding out everything is connected to everything else. Like in my own experience at Samsung, by the way, all the unpopular opinions are my own, the usual disclaimer there. The nature of our business is we are so large, we have so many subsidiaries throughout the world, we depend on a massive network of vendors. And while we're very good at logistics, it's very, very difficult to make sure that disruptions that any one of our vendors or suppliers have don't somehow cause something to back up on our own well-honed pipeline. And then when you're tacking on top of that, you know, given that there's a number of work cultures around the world, we're seeing mobility for business is something that, you know, it's hard to just suddenly adopt, right? Because you're suddenly saying, all right, well, we want to have a bunch of people get on and be able to do their, like, have minimum disruption to their business activities. Not all of them necessarily going to have laptops or mobile phones. If they do, they may not have a corporate issued one. And if they don't have these things, well, you know, the policy before might not have allowed them to use, well, do you just change the policy, issue them one, etc.? How do you set it up properly, especially if your business doesn't really have a mobility policy in place, right? So, I mean, our sales arm is having to work through that with a lot of our customers. I think that that's probably true across anyone that you would ask, you know, working for an OEM in the mobile industry. Because suddenly before it was like, oh, it's a nice to have, maybe we'll give like managers this. Now it's everyone has to have that, especially with the scope of this thing. You know, we don't know when we'll go back to work for real. There'll probably be a lot of opening and closing of offices. And so you want to be prepared for that. But you also, I mean, it's the fast, cheap, good sort of trade-off, right? You want to be able to minimize the disruption that you're making to your own business by not allowing your people to work efficiently. At the same time, it can be very expensive, directly or indirectly, if you do it wrong. So it's something that I think that there's a lot of interest in right now. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that our sales force and a lot of the others are working overtime trying to go and help customers make the right decisions regarding that. I would say that some of the other issues that John had picked up on, you know, you wanted to have a VPN because you don't necessarily want to trust like the entire cellular network or you know, the local coffee shop's Wi-Fi. Well, you're going to have to go and pick a solution that can support doing things like split tunneling. If you want to do that over a mobile device, that's actually a somewhat complicated feature. Like, our devices support that, very proud to say. Not every device necessarily supports that. And so even if it supports that, how do you make it real for your business? How do you configure it? How do you make sure that it's working properly in all the cases that it should? These things are when you're on a very tight timeline, when this is so unprecedented. I mean, in the last 100 years, we haven't really had something like this happen before. That's a big challenge for everyone.
So Michael, you actually hit on something I didn't even think about until you just said it, which was the other dilemma that on the mobile question, Nick, that you raised. Everyone in your house is doing it. So depending on what your house configuration is, namely kids or sisters, friends, you know, roommates, etc., everyone is making those choices. And then if they're not working for the same company, they could be making very different choices, and you're all getting to muddle on the same wireless network in the same time.
So and if we want to rope that back to security very briefly, the fundamental problem of fortification is pretty big for what I do. I work product security, so it's trying to act as the defender. You have to defend everywhere. The attacker just has to find one weak point, right?
Yep,
so
classic.
If everyone in
And
your
it turns
house
out
is-
7-year-olds are oftentimes a weak point.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps it's 7-year-olds that, you know, you're trying to occupy as a parent who's trying to be productive at home. And so this gets to the next item, and you've touched on this a little bit, is there are these devices that are getting pulled out of the shelf, pulled out of the closet, and utilized, right? And so, you know, if we know that that's an issue, you know, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about to help with that, and or at least at minimum to, you know, address it, whether that's, you know, looking at rapidly deploying something new or taking advantage of stuff that's already there, being concerned about legacy code and what can we do about it, you know, that's sort of approach. What's the best route, or others?
Well, it seems to me that the consumer-based product space has been drifting into being essentially the enterprise footprint for quite a while. I mean, the mobile devices like Michael was just talking about, and certainly what Samsung's done, is just a singular example of what are many, many things that are going to be happening in that way. And consequentially now, home-based routers have become firewalls, like corporate firewalls. But we don't call them that because we think of them as connecting our house. And in truth, you know, with all of us now suddenly having our office space be our home address, then you've just essentially created a very different situation where your house has to be essentially as strong, or it will essentially be as exposed as a corporation traditionally would be, because that's where we've all moved to. Number one. Number two, and you hit on legacy code, classic. So what typically has happened, you know, for hackers that are aimed at trying to get information or do disruption, they're going to go after the corporation itself, and they go after the people that are in the corporation, the classic phishing attacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's slightly different about this now, though, is there's a massive footprint to tap into that we're all volunteering to participate in, which is we're searching for information from home. And as you might imagine, creating, you know, completely false information about COVID, or creating sensationalized news, or putting up social media that relates to it, or setting up a brand new campaign that talks about something that updates for your latest, you know, breaking news of the Bay Area to Maryland to, you know, Japan to India. You can start to drag us all towards the very place that you want as a hacker for us to go to. And congratulations, you're no longer behind corporate protecting you in the traditional way. So your commercial or your consumer-based product is the one that's protecting you at this stage. Then there's this massive cohabitation discussion. We kind of touched on this a little bit too, which is it's not just home computing equipment we're using with our own companies. It's all the home and consumer-based equipment that all of our family are being asked to do the same. And honestly, this includes in times whole families that have never come remotely close to touching the internet in this way. They go into the office protects them, that's the way that works. They go into school, the school protects them, that's the way that works. Everything done outside of that, there are many, many families that just don't do business on anything else other than when they go somewhere, either to their school or to their company or to their educational institution and stuff. So that's not true now. And so there's a whole behavioral question on how to protect all of us while we're at home. And it becomes even that much more important, something that's been talked about for years and years and years, which is every single human being has to understand patching the devices, making sure you notice anomalous behavior, not going to websites that are bad. You know, all the things we've been taught, except it's got profound business implications today because you're on your own in so many situations. That security team, that one security person, the outsourced security world, the firewall, the, you know, whatever it is that was protecting, it's not there. And so that broader scale impact has profound implications, part one. And then Michael touched on something that's absolutely true. Every corporation working with each other, if you think about sort of circles, like if you have one company working with one company and we're all in the office, that's one thing. If you got all of your people working all over the world and then all of them all working all over the world, then now we've got this huge spider diagram, which has just exploded the number of places that the security problems can be created. That's the broader scale impact we got to buckle up with. And by the way, the last one, and this is the one I love, I was talking to two healthcare providers who said, we've thrown HIPAA out the window. And the reason they had to was because preserve life being, you know, the number one most important thing, they have cross border state, let's call them the victims or patients, however you want to call it, where they can't get the systems to work right now because they're at home or the systems aren't connected or they're never designed to do this. And so they're literally going the heck with it. We just have to find a person and take care of them and treat them. And all this other privacy stuff is going to be a bit of a mess later. We're probably going to be in trouble, but we're going to do the right thing by the patient. So the construct rules that we're under normal times paying attention to is another one of the broad scale impacts, because they're being broken left, right, and center in order to just keep going.
Yeah, and so the healthcare example is interesting, right? Telemedicine has absolutely exploded, and you know there are obviously solutions out there that have a mature security footprint and posture, you know, but there's probably a lot of ad hoc telemedicine that's going on now, and that's probably on one of your mobile devices. So you know, whether that's healthcare or other industries, Michael, what are some of the things that you're seeing in this realm as, you know, devices come out of the closet and out of the shelf and out of the drawer and all of that?
Well, I was thinking about that. I mean, again, this is kind of a bring your own device writ large, right? Because it's not just, well, I need to be able to do my work on whatever phone I want. I need to be able to do it on whatever home router I want. Oh, I have one in the closet here. I'll dust it off. It'll be fine, right? And you know, if you just look at things that have happened recently, when this first broke, I read a news article about how there was a particular like city council that was very, very proud they were able to work from home very quickly, because they were wondering where they'd get all the laptops from. They realized they had like 400 they were going to like give away to schools or something that were so old. So they just quickly, you know, put some stuff on there. Good, right? Well, from where I sit, given that I do a lot of things with low-level device software, I know that some devices have a longer sort of support life than others, and it's not necessarily all at once, right? Like you look at like a smartphone and you think, oh, well, you know, I buy a smartphone, it's a piece of hardware. No, it's really a whole bunch of different chips flying in close formation, right? And the updates for each of those things, like, you know, sometimes you'll see something hits the news. The one that I was thinking about when I was looking over some of these sample questions you had was, you know, crack and crook, right? These are basically Wi-Fi vulnerabilities where, because of a little implementation mistake that's very widespread, you can trick a router or a device connecting to one, honestly, either way, into thinking that having an all-zero encryption key is totally fine, right? And so those things, okay, crack's, I think, a couple years old. Crook was from earlier this year, like a couple months old. If you were to just dust off something that's kind of beyond its support life, it's got a chip in there from somebody else. They need to be the ones who actually implements the patch for this. Well, was the patch implemented? Was the patch propagated to the right place, etc.? So like on the one side, having like a monoculture is good, because then you're like, all right, well, I'm either all safe or all not so much safe, right? I don't have to worry about like varying degrees of safe, because again, that fundamental problem of fortification comes up. Like the bad guy just has to find one important person, then they just pivot around through that web of connected devices and connected people. On the other side, though, you can say, all right, well, maybe this is something that we can't really win at per se, like because there's just so many of them. Even if you talk about any particular OEM, they're going to use a lot of chips from a lot of places, sometimes for the same purpose, right? And even a different model might get that patch propagated a little later than, you know, another one. So these things are things you always have to worry about from where I'm sitting. So one of the better solutions for that would be, all right, well, if we just all did defense in depth, then great. John hit on it though with the whole, all right, well, we'll just VPN all the things, and then we won't have to worry about if the Wi-Fi chip, so let's say the Wi-Fi chip gets compromised, like a Broadcom style attack. Well, then it can see anything that travels through it, and we could, you know, maybe just make a copy and send off interesting data somewhere else. Well, if you're on a VPN, you don't have to worry about that. However, there's kind of this cost that you have to deal with. Well, it's not just a monetary cost. And VPNs are slow, they're not appropriate for some sorts of traffic, or they can be anyway. So trying to figure out like what the balance is for what you think the actual threats are that you're worried about, that can be pretty complicated, pretty challenging. So the good news, I think, overall, since I started working with Samsung, I believe that the industry, my industry, and a lot of other industries like that have become a lot more aware of security, a lot more mature in terms of dealing with things like, patching. I think that patching will be around for a very long time. The problem that we're running into right now is that, like John's example was just spot on regarding, oh, well, we got a bit of a disruption, like, they'll say like half of some office can't work anymore. If we delay shipping our thing, then maybe so there may be some of these things that won't be evident right away that come up later, where it's like, because there was a kind of a pipeline drain, then some corners might get cut on some devices that you care about, and that won't be evident for quite a while. If it were on the level of a hardware thing, hardware is often specified well in advance. So we're going to be seeing this even after the COVID thing either ends or we get used to a new normal. We'll be seeing this for like years, depending on what. Like, car manufacturers, if they're cutting any corners right now on this, their release cycles are like, 5-10 years for some of the things that they're working with. And so I think we'll be seeing some of those ripples for quite a while. I think the silver lining, though, is that this is kind of calling a bunch of things into question right now, right? Like, okay, it seems like the global supply chain is a great idea, but it can be sometimes brittle. Are there some ways that we can kind of reduce the latency of dealing with things, right? So I think it's a very meaty problem, and we're going to be seeing quite a lot of analysis on it after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably going to be, as we do a post-mortem on this, sorry, bad pun, but there's likely going to be some security ramifications that we didn't consider or may not have seen. And so, if we're trying to find some sort of benefit out of this, the whole mess, okay, yeah, we'll get some learnings out of that. So fantastic feedback, guys. We've got probably time for one more official question, and then we can obviously do some Q&A there as we head into the third of our call. But we touched on this a little bit, right? But I want to kind of key in on this notion of the complexity of software at the edge, right? And up until the last 2 months, everybody kind of defines the edge a little bit differently. But now we've taken devices that were in the edge, but maybe safely behind the four walls, and now are really at the edge, right? And these are devices that have a lot of capability. So are we going to possibly start questioning the level of capability and sophistication in that software stack? So John, would love your thoughts on that.
Sure. The age-old IoT explosion discussion came pretty much full speed when you started seeing businesses put Wi-Fi chips and Ethernet ports on things that had never had them. And in all candor, the company producing it had never been in an IT software world ever, and had just created essentially an interesting technology platform to do good and bad. So part one is those things are now, I think, coming home to roost a little bit in the life-affecting world, where the whole notion of, hey, just ship it as fast as you can and let's see what happens, and we'll just iterate speed in terms of fixes. I just don't think that's going to last, and it's not like it's going to disrupt today. We're not going to see all sorts of brand new rules come out right now this second. However, I think what we're going to watch, and we're reasonably 6 weeks into the hardest part of what we've faced in terms of COVID over the last 5 months. we're globally about 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks total into the hardest part of it. What we're going to start to watch is how much of this stuff doesn't work for the future. And as a side effect of that, we're not going back, in my opinion, to what used to be 2019. We're going to have a much more hybrid working workforce. We're going to have global supply chain changes, to Michael's point, on where manufacturing, final assembly, shipping, and all sorts of other things are done. And honestly, if the tariff problem fights didn't start it, this is most assuredly going to. We've got the geopolitical tensions that are essentially saying we're just going to change the way the world works because there's an inevitable recession coming. And so that's going to start to have its interesting effect on companies and businesses and the like. And all to be said, the sheer idea of what we just had to do globally, which made everyone go, you mean to tell me that we're using Zoom in order to keep a hospital floating? And I'm not picking on Zoom in this respect. I'll pick on it a little bit, but I've been picking on Eric for about the last 6 weeks anyway. So, but that just is just one perfect example of, as fast as we could do features, we've got to get them out the door in order to win the feature fight. And good on them. I mean, Eric and his team have done a phenomenal job building a great use platform that grew like crazy. However, the consequence factor of suddenly applying it to a scenario that's unusual, shall we say, they're now paying technical debt left way and right way from Sunday by having to fix things that inevitably they kind of generally would have guessed were there. I think anybody could generally guess some of these things are going to exist in a complex platform. However, now they're having to react. They're also distracting Eric from just being a success story and Zoom being a success story, because they're having to explain themselves as to how did it happen, why did they do it, what went wrong, all the things that are detractors from really a great story of Zoom being able to help the world connect to people. And so those kinds of things are the security implications that I think every other business should pay attention to and wake up and go, I don't want to be the newspaper poster child that said, I create ventilators that are the best in the market that now have a software problem that are causing those ventilators not to work correctly. And therefore now, instead of doing the best thing for the world, I'm actually the villain. And I think additionally, all the business companies that have essentially produced consumer product, or what you might call semi-critical enterprise commercial business software, had best also noticed that we're all using them on the internet now. And so we're just as dangerous to them as they are to us. And what I mean by that is, to the example we talked a little bit about mobility, when you've got a set of, let's call it structured computing in a data center and structured use and access behind firewalls and on corporate networks and VPN, a lot of the problems that can be created going onto the internet by the things inside the wall are filtered out, because you've got filtering systems that essentially businesses put into place. So they don't pollute the internet with their computer problems. And equally so, being on the internet, you're facing, hackers all day long and attempted exploits and the like. And so net of it is you've got a hostile environment over there. Oops. All right, everybody's on the same hostile environment. We've just taken corporate and put it on the internet just as much as everybody else is, equally. And so there's a bi-directional problem that says, I'm connecting more and more to you and depending more and more on you. You've got to be right. You've got to design it right. Sorry, you got to put security in. No, it's not a feature, but now it's going to be, because now the whole world is essentially pivoted that way, part one. And then part two, as a service provider, you got to be ready, because congratulations, all the devices that you say, oh, well, it's Cisco, it's Samsung, they're connecting to Box, big deal. They're connecting to Zoom, no big deal. Wait, now it's just people on the internet using all sorts of devices connecting to Zoom like everybody else did. And so both sides have to pay attention to this piece, and we all do, we have to get to a place where the problems that we are creating are actually getting solved faster than they're being created by the creative work and feature sets that we've got. Because now the world has started to all put it together. We rely on this stuff 100%. If Zoom doesn't work right now, I swear, any number of people would feel like they're completely out of touch. All sorts of human beings wouldn't be able to do work or business. And the same is true for WebEx and GoToMeeting and all the the work that other companies have done. That essentialness means it darn well has to be designed differently than it has been with security and the checkpoints.
That's a great point, and actually maybe saves it to our last question here. And I'll start this one with Michael. Feature development being prioritized above security, right? That's kind of what I think you were hinting at there. And is that going to change a little bit now, right? I mean, obviously feature functionality is critical, and it's the shiny object in the room that is the sexiest. But then all of a sudden it can be dramatically overshadowed by a vulnerability that takes all that away, at least to a certain extent. So, Michael, what's the mobile implication there?
Well, I think on the one level, it should be prioritized over security, right?
Well, you're a
Insofar as
security guy, so of course you say that, right?
well, no, I mean, it should, like, feature developments, that's what people want to pay for, right? So like that
Yeah.
should be like number one priority. The trick then is making sure that security doesn't starve while you're trying to get whatever you're done with, right? And I think one of the things that is being really thrown into sharp relief right now is that, okay, we have to cut corners globally in order to get things, moving again. So you don't want to necessarily be like the hip example, like, well, we just won't do that for a while and hope that it'll work out. I mean, that was obviously in that case, I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, people's lives are on the line. However, like in a lot of other cases where it's a lesser evil that you might be going for, if you were to say, well, we just don't have the time to do that, or like maybe we had to prioritize like where we put, I don't know, scarce QA resources, et cetera, differently, and do prioritize the functional over security. Then again, this is something where, like I was saying with cars, we'll probably start seeing, people find some flaws and things caused by people trying to not necessarily go fast, but go normal speed in a situation where they don't have as much horsepower behind. So how do you deal with that in the long term? I think the most mature way to try to think of product security is, it's kind of like QA insofar as you want to make sure that you're doing it throughout the cycle so that you don't have to wait at the end, right? Because time to market is very important, no matter what it is that you're building, hardware, software, whatever, or widgets for that matter. So in order to be able to reduce the amount of time it takes to do a good job on security, and to make sure that whatever job you're doing is whatever the bar is for good job, that's something that I don't know that a lot of companies had been thinking about in such terms, like not on a very, very high level. They should start thinking about that as we see what happens here, where all of a sudden, because of these pipeline drains throughout your supply process, that there's going to be some pressure to just say, well, ship it and let's hope for the best, right? So if there is anything that's going to come out of this, I think that yes, it is correct that feature development should be kind of job one. However, that does not mean that you want to ignore all the things that make features actually work the way that they're supposed to. So that's going to be a big process conversation. I think a lot of people are going to be having that, trying to figure out how to do either better defense in depth to make sure that even if you do have a mistake, it's not an immediately fatal mistake, or to have some other way of having controls to, like, it's not defense in depth, for example, to say, I formally verified the code. It's a very expensive step to take. It's not an appropriate step to take. You want to make sure that there's some control that is able to continue disruptions to the ability of people to work, that I guess is invariant to external conditions.
Right. Nick, you've probably seen, I think everybody on the call probably has seen at least some version of an internet meme that jokes about, at my company or my organization, digital transformation was caused by choice A, CEO. That's not checked. Choice B, the CTO, also not checked. Choice C, COVID, checked, right? And so every business is now just as fast as they can think of how they can make a digital version of themselves, because they can't be as physically connected as they used to be. And that increases the sort of the aperture for just how often the number of devices and pieces of software and criticality of all these business services that we're using is going up, and it's going up rapidly. Because new ways to operate have now had to be created for a lot of corporations. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, even just something as simple as working from home. And as you might imagine, one of the consequence factors of this is, and it's statistically being proven out, there is a massive, massive shift to cloud-based services right now happening right before our eyes. And it's because, big surprise, that's what also connects to being mobile. I'm mobile, the cloud's nebulously mobile, it allows me to essentially accelerate what I want to do, so let's use that. Because the institutional systems that used to be used are slow, they're sitting on campus, they're not available because there's not great connectivity, or any number of other things. And as a result, the whole features / security example that Zoom went through, everyone else that's in this as a service space, take notice, because what they just went through is what everyone else that becomes popular is going to go through over these digital sort of transforming worlds right now. So it's buckle up time.
One small shameless plug is perhaps, in the face of all of this, a layer of security that's just there, that's infused into the code when you're coding it, when you're building it, when you're deploying it, to kind of tackle some of the unknown things that you don't necessarily obviously know about. So, perfect solution there. We did have one question, and it was, did you mention the importance of hard disk encryption? So, that maybe would be, John, kind of your area, but certainly Michael, welcome to tackle that one as well.
Yeah, I don't think that we called it out specifically, but let's talk about it as device encryption versus hard disk specific. And candidly, in 2020, it's almost unfathomable that you're sort of staring at systems or devices that don't have some sort of native capacity to put data to a physical media that doesn't require some sort of unlocking system to get back after it. So the criticality in the general topic of putting information onto a medium and then storing it in the safe and encrypted way, we didn't mention it in particular so far, but +1 or +100 or whatever version I want to use on this one, that said that is a almost vital thing. I would also offer up that if we're going to go that far, then it's the classic data at rest, data in motion. We got to do both conversation, which is the transportation of information encrypted also. Because we're all jumping on the internet and we're starting to use cloud-based services, that information going to and from, just as much as if it's sitting on, has to have, the encryption in and of itself. The world of SSL has made our lives generally easy when it comes to this, but honestly, buy time decisions, you can still buy services that don't have encryption built in. It blows my mind that you have online internet-based services that aren't just automatically having it. It's bizarre. I would have thought that was, fait accompli by at this stage, but it turns out it isn't. And so it should be searched for. And again, I'm going to pick on Eric for this one. Study what they mean by when they say they have encryption, because they might not be using the same language the rest of the planet is.
Yeah. Well, and to Eric's credit, right, in the face of all of this, he kept us connected, right?
Oh, totally.
I know you think that,
because we've all been in the woodshed. I feel for him. Like Chuck and I have enjoyed that. John Chambers and I have enjoyed that. I was smiling because I saw Adam Gladner's on as an attendee, and he knows that all too well, what that's been like in the worlds that we've worked together. And so believe me, it is a fragile world in which I am not remotely trying to throw a rock. I'm just smiling about it a little bit.
Oh yeah. This fireside chat format, we can speak freely. So absolutely. Well, Michael, any other final thoughts on your end before we wrap her up?
I guess one thing that I feel somewhat obligated to mention there is so we've talked a lot about Zoom here as an example. And I know that there's been, so I think you had some thoughts about disablers, right, for sales. Where, if you make a mistake and people see it in the market, then they think ill of you. And on some level, that's appropriate insofar as, yes, you made a mistake. But the absence of seeing mistakes doesn't necessarily imply security, right? So let's put it this way. Zoom probably had some of the same code for quite a while. Then suddenly Zoom mattered. And because Zoom mattered, a bunch of people who are not motivated by doing bad things to people, there's not like a profit motive here. They take a look and they say, oh, excuse me, you have a problem, right? So the important part of this is not necessarily to say, oh, well, they had a problem. Clearly, we can't use them. Let's go to use something that no one's ever heard of any problems with. Because I can point to a lot of fly-by-night vendors that will totally say, oh, we've never been caught on that. And if ever we did, we just go under. So it's part of it is not just, all right, is there absence or presence of problems? It's what do you do in the case? Yes, everyone has problems, right? Hopefully you catch most of the problems internally and before the thing ships. But the unlikely event is by and large, like you talk to anyone doing product security, they'll find a lot of problems mostly before the thing ships. But in the event that something goes out and you have an incident, then looking at the response to the incident is actually something that should either make you more or less comfortable with that company beyond that, right? So I think Zoom is taking a lot of fire just because they jumped on that and they were like, you know, this is a chance for us to both make a difference and also to get some marketing, right? Like, so that was great in a like selfish and selfless way at the same time. And because of that, like a lot of people started using them, and because a lot of people started using them, a lot of people started trying to do some free penetration testing on them, right? For good and for evil. But I don't want to necessarily say, oh, well, because of all this, clearly you should be using some other platform.
Right.
That may be true, but it's not necessarily an implication that it should be.
Yeah, Michael, it's a great point. There's a family member's child was told, you know, we're not using X, Y, or Z. We're jumping off of it and we're using this other thing because that's not Zoom. And I asked that family member, like, hey, what were the students being told? And they're like, oh, well, the Zoom's got a security problem, so we're jumping on this other platform. You look at the other platform and you're like, no, get off that as fast as humanly possible. That Zoom's fine. Like, what you're going on to is a disaster. And yet that was the kind of reaction you're talking about, which is because they weren't in the newspaper the way Zoom was. There was a predilection to jump onto something that hadn't been called out yet and hadn't had a problem, even though that doesn't mean they don't have them. It just means they haven't gotten caught at it yet. No, Zoom's done a great job in reacting to all the things it had to do. Eric took it on personally, and their whole engineering team has been great. So.
Yeah, they owned it. And spoiler alert, we are on Zoom right now. So,
Yeah.
there you go.
They have great virtual background.
So I think Doug, our CTO, was there a question that came in?
Actually, no, you took care of it.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, I think we are past our 45. If there's no other questions, we can wrap it up. I gave Michael a final thought. John, would any other kind of final thoughts for you?
No, just for everybody that got a chance to join, thanks for jumping on. Stay safe, stay healthy, and just know that you know, if you were to take nothing else, I think both Michael and I, you know, we're careful about not saying things like the words endorse, because that wasn't really our goal today. It was actually Nick and Doug and certainly the whole team over at RunSafe. They've got a pretty interesting idea, and they're working at something that's frankly very germane to everything we talked about. And they tried hard as heck not to be sellers today, so that way we could just enjoy a 45-minute chat. But watch this space, because they're actually working on one of the hardest problems that we've had for 50 years and are trying to tackle something at the very systemic level. So keep an eye on this little company. It's going to be making a difference over the next few years.
Can't say thank you enough, John, for that. And we know that webinars have also exploded in light of the inability to meet in person. And we know you're getting inundated out there to spend 30, 60 minutes with various folks in webinar format. So we're appreciative of all the attendees coming out, appreciative of John and Michael, you know, sharing your expertise with us. And obviously we wish everybody out there stays healthy, stays safe, especially as we kind of start to slowly open things up. You know, we want everybody to be healthy and happy out there. And obviously, if there are further questions about us as a business, we would love to entertain those. But again, yeah, as John stated, this was really just meant to be an open discussion, a fireside chat to just share, you know, thoughts and reactions and tap into some some people with some great experience. So thanks everybody, appreciate you coming, and with that, it is a wrap. Take care, have a good afternoon.
Stay safe.